It started with a ship that didn't belong in the headlines. No weapons, no soldiers, no dramatic announcement, just a tanker moving through one of the most important waterways on Earth. For a few moments, it looked like nothing unusual was happening. But what followed was not just a routine naval response. It was a signal that revealed something much bigger than a single incident. Something that affects every country, every economy, and every person watching this video right now. Because what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz is not just about geopolitics. It is about energy. And energy is everything. Let's take a step back and really understand what this means. Every single day, an enormous volume of oil moves through a narrow waterway called the Strait of Hormuz. At first glance, it may just look like another route on the map, but in reality, it's one of the most important lifelines of the global economy. This single passage connects major oil-producing regions in the Middle East to the rest of the world. Countries across Asia, Europe, and beyond depend on what flows through it. And we're not talking about small numbers. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through this one choke point. That's millions of barrels every single day. Now pause for a moment and think about that. One narrow stretch of water, helping power vehicles on busy city roads, keeping factories running day and night, fueling airplanes that connect continents, and supporting entire economies that rely on stable energy supplies. This isn't just oil. This is the engine behind modern life. Now imagine what happens if that flow is suddenly disrupted, not completely stopped, just slowed down or threatened. The impact begins almost instantly. Oil markets react within minutes. Prices start climbing, not gradually, but sharply, because uncertainty in energy supply creates fear, and fear drives markets. As oil prices rise, the effects spread quickly. Fuel becomes more expensive. Transport costs increase. Shipping goods from one country to another becomes costlier, and when businesses face higher costs, they pass those costs on. That's when everyday life starts to change. Groceries become more expensive. Electricity bills rise. Travel costs increase. And households begin to feel the pressure. At the same time, supply chains start to weaken. Delays increase. Shipping schedules get disrupted. Industries that depend on steady fuel supplies begin to slow down. Some may even halt temporarily. And when production slows, availability drops. When availability drops, prices rise even further. It becomes a chain reaction. What started as a disruption in one location begins to ripple across the entire global system, and economies don't just feel a slight impact. They begin to shake. Growth slows. Markets become unstable, investors pull back, and governments are forced to respond. All of this from one narrow waterway. That's the reality of how interconnected the world has become. A single choke point like the Strait of Hormuz isn't just a geographic feature. It's a pressure point, a place where even small disruptions can create massive consequences. And that's why it matters so much. Because in today's world, energy isn't just a resource. It's stability, it's security, and in many ways, it's power. That's why what happened recently carries far more weight than it seems at first glance. On the surface, it may look like a simple maritime incident, a few ships adjusting their course, a moment of hesitation, nothing dramatic, nothing explosive. But in reality, moments like these are never just about what we see. They are about what they represent. Because this isn't just about ships turning around. It's about control. Control over one of the most critical systems that keeps the modern world running: energy, and more specifically, the movement of energy. When we talk about oil and gas, we're not just talking about resources buried underground. We're talking about a continuous flow, a system that depends on extraction, transportation, and delivery, all working together without interruption. And the most vulnerable part of that system is the movement, because energy only has value when it reaches its destination. If it can't move, it can't power anything. Not cities, not industries, not economies. That's where control becomes everything. Whoever has the ability to influence or control that flow holds a powerful position in the global system. not always through force, but through leverage. Because controlling energy routes means influencing supply, and influencing supply means influencing prices. When supply is stable, markets remain calm, prices stay predictable, growth continues. But when control becomes uncertain, everything changes. Markets react instantly, prices become volatile, and confidence begins to erode. This is what people often underestimate. Power in today's world is not just about military strength. It's about systems. It's about infrastructure. It's about the invisible networks that connect producers to consumers. And energy sits at the center of all of it. Think of the global economy like a heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, predictable. Now imagine what happens when that rhythm is disrupted. It doesn't just slow down, it becomes unstable. That's exactly what happens when the flow of energy is threatened. Industries begin to hesitate, investors become cautious, governments start preparing for worst-case scenarios, and even if no actual disruption occurs, the fear of disruption is often enough to trigger real consequences, because perception matters. If markets believe that supply is at risk, they act accordingly. They adjust prices, they shift investments, they prepare for shortages, and those reactions create real-world effects. This is why control over energy routes is so significant. It's not just about physical access, it's about influence over expectations, over confidence, over stability itself. In many ways, it shapes the rhythm of the global economy, because energy is not just another commodity, it is the foundation upon which modern economies are built. Without it, nothing moves, nothing grows, nothing functions. So when something happens that even slightly challenges that flow, it sends a message that the system is not as secure as it appears. And in a world built on interdependence, even small signals can have massive consequences. That is the deeper reality behind events like these. It's not about the ships, it's about what those ships reveal. A silent reminder that control over energy is ultimately control over the pace, stability, and direction of the global economy. For years, countries have tried to reduce their dependence on this single route. They've invested in pipelines, alternative ports, new trade corridors. But despite all that effort, the world is still deeply dependent on Hormuz, and that dependency creates vulnerability. Now here's where things become serious. When tensions rise in this region, oil markets react instantly. Even the possibility of disruption can push prices higher. And when prices rise, everything else follows. Fuel becomes expensive, transportation costs increase, food prices rise, electricity bills go up. And suddenly, a geopolitical situation thousands of miles away starts affecting your daily life. This is the hidden connection most people don't think about. Geopolitics is not distant, it's personal. Now let's talk about the bigger picture. In recent years, the global balance of power has been shifting. New alliances have formed, trade relationships have evolved, and countries have been quietly preparing for scenarios exactly like this one. Not publicly, not loudly, but strategically. Energy security has become one of the most important priorities for major economies, because without stable energy, nothing else works. Factories stop, transportation halts, growth slows, and political pressure rises internally. This is why moments like these are so closely watched, not because of what has already happened, but because of what could happen next. There are always multiple paths forward in situations like this. The first path is stability. Tensions ease, diplomatic efforts succeed, trade continues, and the system holds together. This is the outcome everyone hopes for. The second path is pressure, not full conflict, but prolonged uncertainty. This is where things become complicated, because uncertainty itself has a cost. Businesses delay decisions, investments slow down, markets become volatile, and economies begin to feel the strain. The third path is escalation, and this is the scenario that concerns analysts the most, because escalation doesn't stay contained, it spreads across regions, across markets, across industries. But here's something important to understand. Modern conflicts are not always fought with weapons. They are fought with economics, with supply chains, with access, with control over critical resources. Energy sits at the center of all of it. It is both a tool and a vulnerability. Now think about how interconnected the world has become. Oil extracted in one region, shipped through another, refined somewhere else, and consumed globally. It's a system built on cooperation, but also exposed to disruption. That's why even small incidents can have large consequences, because they test the system, they expose weaknesses, and they force countries to respond. Some responses are immediate, others take time, but all of them shape what happens next. This is where long-term strategy comes into play. Countries are already thinking beyond the current situation. They're asking critical questions. How do we reduce dependence on vulnerable routes? How do we secure alternative supplies? How do we protect our economies from sudden shocks? And the answers to those questions will define the next decade. We are already seeing early signs of change. Investments in alternative energy are increasing. New trade corridors are being developed. Regional partnerships are evolving. But transitions take time, and during that time, the world remains exposed. This is why moments like these feel so tense, because they sit at the intersection of the present and the future. The old system is still in place, but the new system is not fully ready, and in that gap, uncertainty lives. Now let's bring this back to you. Why should this matter? Because global events like this don't stay global. They trickle down into economies, into businesses, into households. Fuel prices affect transportation. Transportation affects goods. Goods affect your cost of living. It's all connected. And that's why understanding these situations is important, not just as news, but as insight into how the world actually works. So what happens next? The honest answer is, no one knows for sure. What we do know is this: the world is watching closely. Decisions are being made behind closed doors, and every move is being calculated carefully, because the stakes are high, not just for governments, but for the global economy as a whole. This is not just a regional issue, it's a global one, and the outcome will shape more than just energy markets. It will influence trade, politics, and the balance of power itself. For now, the system is still holding, ships are still moving, energy is still flowing, but the margin for error is getting smaller. And in situations like this, it doesn't take much to tip the balance. One decision, one miscalculation, one unexpected move, that's all it takes. And that's why the world is paying attention, even if it doesn't always look like it. Because beneath the surface, something bigger is unfolding. Not just a moment, but a shift. A shift that will define how energy moves, how economies function, and how power is measured in the years ahead. And it all comes back to a simple idea: control the flow, and you influence the world. Right now, that flow is still moving, but the question is, for how long? And more importantly, under whose control? That is the real story, and we are only at the beginning of it.